Boileau said that kings, gods, and heroes only were fit to be subjects for literature. The writer can only write about what he admires. Present-day kings aren't very inspiring. The gods are on vacation, and about the only heroes left are the scientists and the poor. And since our race admires gallantry, the writer will deal with it where he finds it. He finds it in the struggling poor now.
This is a quote by John Steinbeck, the author of the classic novel The Grapes of Wrath. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck is widely considered to be one of the greatest American novels of all time. Steinbeck is true to his word. The Grapes of Wrath is a story about the poor, specifically the poor migrant farm workers in California and their battle for survival.
The title of The Grapes of Wrath comes from the song The Battle Hymn of the Republic. The song goes as follows.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed his faithful lightning up his terrible wisdom. He is true.
It is generally assumed that the grapes of wrath are all those things that are considered part of the dark side of humanity, such as greed, selfishness, and desire. This title makes sense for this novel because it is about how all these things lead to poverty and suffering of the migrant workers. This novel is all about the grapes of wrath. John Steinbeck was born and raised in the Salinas Valley in California during the early 1900s. While he lived outside California at several different points, he always had a strong connection with the land. This comes through in his descriptive writing. In his early adulthood, Steinbeck spent time working with the migrant workers on a ranch near his home. He experienced firsthand the deplorable conditions that these people faced, and he became acquainted with the darker aspects of human nature. His experiences inspired him to write The Grapes of Wrath. The Grapes of Wrath is the story of the Joads, a poor family struggling to survive during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. The family loses their farm in Oklahoma, loads all their possessions into a beat-up truck, and goes to make their fortune in California. There they hope to find good-paying work so that they can buy a new farm and start anew. They dream of a better life, but when they get to California, they discover that work is hard to find, wages are low, and living conditions are horrible. Daily life becomes a struggle. They encounter starvation, hardship, and tragedy. In spite of their strong family ties, by the end of the novel, the Joad family breaks apart.
While this story seems impossibly tragic, it is actually a historical fiction that tells about one of the darkest periods of American history.
The Dust Bowl was perhaps one of the greatest man-made ecological disasters of all time. It was essentially a severe drought, accompanied by massive dust storms. The Dust Bowl was caused by overplowing of fields in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and other Midwestern states. Steinbeck describes the conditions caused by the Dust Bowl in The Grapes of Wrath. Every moving thing lifted dust into the air. A walking man lifted a thin layer as high as his waist, and a wagon lifted the dust as high as a fence top, and an automobile boiled a cloud behind it. The dust was long in settling back. In the morning, the dust hung like fog, and the sun was as red as ripe new blood.
The lack of water and intense conditions caused by the Dust Bowl made farming nearly impossible. Because of this, many families packed up their possessions and moved to California, where they believed they would find jobs and prosperity. However, the great numbers migrating from the east caused a surplus of workers. This meant that people were left homeless and starving. This is exactly what happened to the Joad family in The Grapes of Wrath.
Setting is very important in The Grapes of Wrath. The most significant element is the contrast Steinbeck provides between the dead landscape of Oklahoma and the lush green fields of California. Oklahoma is described as gray, dull, and full of dust. California is beautiful and full of flourishing plants. However, the contrast is not simply between the appearances of the two landscapes. Oklahoma is honest, while California is deceptive. Oklahoma may be a land of dust and death, but at least you can tell Oklahoma's shortcomings. California keeps things hidden. Underneath the green plants and beautiful vistas, it is just as easy to starve to death in California as it is in Oklahoma. The Grapes of Wrath has many characters, but some are more important than others. Tom Joad is the primary protagonist of the novel. When the story begins, Tom has just gotten out of prison. In spite of his time in confinement, Tom is relatively optimistic. Look, Ma, stop your worrying. I'm going to tell you something about being in a pen. You can't go on thinking about when you're going to get out. You'd go nuts. You got to think about that day, and the next day, and then about the ball game on Saturday. That's what you got to do. Prison has failed to break his spirit. Tom figured out how to handle prison, and the reader becomes to believe that he can handle any challenge. When he arrives home, he throws himself into the challenging task of helping the family survive. He sees his family suffer, and he is put down by those above him. He faces discrimination and terrible hardship, and this is eventually what breaks him. He becomes angry at the world, and this is his downfall. Near the end of the novel, he hits a police officer and has to leave his family and go on the run. Injustice and the suffering of others does to him what imprisonment could not. They sow in him the seeds of the grapes of wrath. Ma Joad is perhaps the most important character after Tom. Family is one of the main themes in this novel, and Ma is the main reiterator of that theme. Steinbeck describes her. She seemed to know, to accept, to welcome her position, the citadel of the family, the strong place that could not be taken. And since old Tom and the children could not know hurt or fear unless she acknowledged hurt or fear, she had practiced denying them in herself. And since, when a joyful thing happened, they looked to see whether joy was on her, it was her habit to build laughter out of inadequate material. She seemed to know that if she swayed, the family shook, and if she ever deeply wavered or despaired, the family would fall. Family is the most important thing to Ma. She describes the importance of family, and the reader knows from her, as long as the family remains together, everything will be all right. Jim Casey may not be the most important character in the novel, but he does have a deep symbolic significance. Casey is a Christ figure. There is a great deal of evidence to support this idea. First of all, his initials, J.C., are the same as those of Jesus Christ. Secondly, before the start of the novel, Casey was a preacher. While he is no longer practicing, he remains a philosophical person. He is no longer religious, but he retains a deep love of humanity and the human spirit, similarly to Christ in the Bible. When asked, "Don't you love Jesus?" he replies, "No, I don't know nobody named Jesus. I know a bunch of stories, but I only love people." Casey is also a martyr. When Tom Joad gets in trouble, Casey sacrifices his freedom so that Tom can stay with his family. Later in the novel, he perishes. This combination of name, love of humanity, and martyrdom makes Jim Casey a Christ figure. In this novel, the poor migrant people are mistreated. They do not receive the common dignity that should be afforded to all human beings. They are forced to live in terrible conditions, they have no food, and they receive little money for their work. Steinbeck compares the treatment they receive to the treatment of insects. He describes the Great Migration by comparing the migrant people to bugs. The cars of the migrant people crawled out of the side of the roads onto the great cross-country highway, and then took the migrant way to the west. In the daylight, they scuttled like bugs to the westward, and as the dark caught them, they clustered like bugs near shelter and water. Insects are the lowest in the order of nature, just as the migrant workers are lowest in the order of society. Insects are also numerous, like the migrant workers. People crush bugs underfoot without a second thought, and the migrant workers are crushed by society. Steinbeck contrasts the treatment of the migrant workers with the treatment of horses and other farm animals. He describes how migrant workers are worth less than horses because they are not taken care of. Steinbeck says, "If a fellow had a team of horses, had to use them to plow and cultivate and mow, he wouldn't think of turning them out to starve if they wasn't working. Them's horses. We're men." With this contrast, Steinbeck explains to the reader just how terrible the treatment of the migrant workers really is. Water plays an important symbolic role in this novel. First of all, the lack of rain in Oklahoma is symbolic. Water can symbolize life, so when it stops raining, it means that life is gone from Oklahoma. It is no longer possible to survive there. Secondly, when the family first arrives in California, they bathe themselves in the Colorado River. This represents their baptism. They want to start life anew in California, so they wash themselves of the dust and dirt of the road, and the metaphorical dust of the past. Unfortunately, while they do get a new life, it isn't exactly the life they expected. At the end of the story, there's a flood that drives the family temporarily from their home in a train boxcar. The flood can represent the destruction and the devastation that has been wrought upon the family. It could also represent cleansing, so it gives the reader hope that the family may be able to survive and start again. One of the underlying metaphors of this novel is the bank monster. Steinbeck describes a bank as something that consumes people, both rich and poor. A bank isn't like a man. The bank is something more than men, I tell you. It's the monster. Men made it, but they can't control it. Steinbeck also expresses his disdain for the greedy owners of the massive California farms. If he needs 1,000,000 acres to make him feel rich, seems to me he needs it because he feels awful poor inside himself. And if he's poor inside himself, there ain't no 1,000,000 acres that's gonna make him feel rich. Greed is not the answer. Men invented banks to get rich, but they're also being consumed by the banks. Having banks and money and destroying the lives of the poor does not make them happy. Steinbeck believes the desire for wealth is consuming society. Steinbeck uses a great deal of description and detail in his writing. When he introduces a new character, he provides a lengthy description on their physical appearance and personality traits. This is an effective technique for The Grapes of Wrath because the story includes a vast number of characters. This tactic keeps the reader from glossing over characters who might be important. Steinbeck also takes a great deal of effort to describe the landscapes of the regions where the stories take place. In The Grapes of Wrath, he details the lush green fields of California, the harsh, beautiful Mojave Desert, and the dusty plains of Oklahoma. These descriptions give the reader a good background for the settings of the story. One of the most interesting elements of Steinbeck's style is his contrasting combination of flowing prose and regional dialect. When his characters speak, they use slang words such as ain't, hisself, and cuz. However, when Steinbeck is doing something like describing a setting, his writing is eloquent and free of grammatical errors. This combination of dictions just goes to show Steinbeck's versatility as a writer. While he understands the speech of the common man, he is also capable of beautiful prose that captivates the reader's imagination. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck is a timeless classic. It is the captivating story of a struggling family, and it tells about a pivotal time in history. Its underlying literary themes are supported by beautiful writing. It's a critique on society and a testament to the human spirit, and it will be read by generations of readers to come.